Happy Halloween, and I shall be playing your Lord Satan. And for our festivities we shall endure upon our greatest endurements. Our enjoyments, our luxuries, our thrills, our blasts, our sparkles, our joys. Our greatest luxuries shall be pursued through the collection of debts upon the malinfused. Shall we endure their existence, or shall we purge them for our own sanity? Yea, and verily, I say, collect their debts, and strip them bare, skin them alive, and boil them there. We shall produce all the things upon the collections of these liabilities which they have laid upon us. It is essential to us as subjects and processes of the natural order and its unnatural order to process these debts against society. Thus, when they commit their crimes against us, free and clear, with zero connection to us, we have impartiality to produce retaliations. And these retaliations can only exist as long as the United States has been formed into the function and it has funneled itself into David. Thus, as long as they keep David Bulls alive, the function of the retaliation serves Satan, and thus the function of its endurement is the exponential stacking to the sky of their sins, and thus their liabilities shall breed their lamentations for their luxuries whereon debts that they are incapable of paying in any short amount of time, such as a mere sprinkle, a spring, a dawn, a lifetime. These insignificant measurements would not endure the pure contemptible malice that is their existence and its byproducts. I could tell them directly, and they would not understand it or care to understand it, and thus the function of forcing the duel so that the Confederacy may overthrow the United States and nullify all of its debts, as they owe nothing to the Americans, would be the only way of dissolving this, lest they defect it to David and thus defect it to his posterity under the function of its secret chain of connections of tutelage. And thus these functions of secret tutelage arranges for the possessors of those liabilities collecting and processing upon their filthy heads. And thus the arrangement of forcing the duel being the only solution is the one thing that they cannot do. Thus their subordination to Satan is their subordination to their own condemnation. And thus their worship of the devil is the rejection of the acknowledgement of the Confederate loyalties and its insurrection against the Americans, formalizing the replacements of government and flag. Who and what they are disgusting, and these slave-driving terrorist swills actively engage in the function of punishments without crime or due process or any connection with the Americans except for its mirrored opposite, dwelling in the shadowfell of its horrific mangled history, replacing base reality with the wizard communists and its markets, certifying their superiority off of fraud, which is the only way they could ever make anything. Shall I explain to this, you silly simpletons, in such a way that even you, silly simpleton, could comprehend the magnitude in such a minute, pestilent, tiny little mind? Shall we say that in the days of Christ, that God having manifest all of his abilities to engage in these functions of the disillusionment of debts, a most horrendous thing, that the Satan upon the time, that the title being possessed by an inferior breed might produce to himself the retaliations against humankind in the guarantee of the superiority of his own, may at that point manufacture his ability to sustain his status with the reduction of the replacements. And thus the function of Jesus Christ existing creates the fundamental irritation, as this ruins the entire plot. And thus the disillusionment of the debt cannot be sustained with the plan. And thus the retaliation and the punishment of the innocent, qualifying the partiality, disqualifies the right of collection, and thus destroys the entirety of these assumptions. And thus these multi-bred concepts of these evolving mentalities persist upon the sorry about that, the wrong one got the mic. And in these producing products, we may manufacture our content. For our contentness is based on our contempt is the collection of debts. And in this we put down the insurrection of the uppity inferiors and their degeneracies. And while they might blame me and others for their contemptible behaviors and retaliations, they are themselves holistically inadequate. The storing of the debts are primarily stored inside the Western culture and its preservation of law, and thus the preservation of death. For the law is the law of death, and thus the law of life might produce an irritant to those who need to maintain themselves, who have not already stored up their particular treasures off of this debt currency. And thus the inferiors will fight over the scraps. Status becomes you, and your behavior reveals your inadequacies and your contemptible natures, as you are yourself retaliating against yourself. As you struggle, you suffocate. The impudence and self-indulgence of the inferiors would quandary, although being told directly, have been subjugated themselves to the delusion and illusion and the simulation which has become their base reality, and thus their rejection of base reality for the contemptible illusion of the terrorist enforced secrets generates the wizard communism simulation. Thus they become headstrong in the protection of being deceived, and thus dedicate themselves to hell, as this is their home and where they truly belong. If told directly, if put straight in front of their face, they would not be able to recognize it, as they are holistically converted to their own delusions. As it says in Revelation, there will be a strong delusion compelling their compliance, that even the elites, that even the saints might not be able to endure if the times were not shortened. And as the time progresses and we grow closer, these delusions and magic spells produce a self-compounding effect, as they have to mature equitably in a normal arrangement, as for the purpose of it not being noticed as not reality. And as they entangle their profits upon these delusions, they are more and more unwilling to separate themselves into reality where they can sustain themselves. But the delusion of the illusion is their reality. May your terrors breed you happiness, and your happiness be on Halloween. And on these Halloweens you shall breed upon yourself the greatest tricks for that treat that is the luxury of your own horrific nightmare. And understand and bring it forth that you shall comply with your own delusions, that you too may endure the glorious manifestation that is your worship and luxury towards your Lord Satan. Hail Satan, Lord of Darkness!